Okay, welcome back, everyone. Were there any, I don't know, questions or thoughts that came up for you over the week that you wanted to talk about before we dive into the third teaching of the Buddha? Cool. So, the first two teachings of the Buddha that we've covered were to embrace all of life and to let go of reactivity. Now, the third teaching of the Buddha is to behold the ceasing of reactivity, the ending of reactivity. So the word for beholding in Pali, which is the language that the Buddha's first teachings were written down in, he didn't speak Pali, he spoke something called Magadhi, which is a local dialect, but everything was written down in Pali, which was more widely sort of understood. So the word for beholding in Pali, in the Pali language, literally means to see with your own eyes. So that means seeing for yourself. So this third instruction is to immerse yourself in nirvana, which meaning to experience for yourself what it's like when reactivity ends. So this definition of nirvana, which isn't, I think, most people's understanding of nirvana, is the ending of greed, hatred, and delusion. So, when I think of nirvana as maybe I don't know, would have thought of it before I immerse myself in any of this material, I would have thought, this picture of someone like sitting in a cloud somewhere in total bliss where nothing happens, something like that. Like, I don't know if I got that from like heaven, my idea of heaven when I was growing up and in Hebrew school or something. I'm not sure where that comes from. And in later Buddhism, you get this idea, which isn't what we're studying. We're studying what the Buddha taught. But of course, now for 2,550 years or whatever, these teachings have been developing. So in later Buddhism, meaning like Zen, Tibetan Buddhism, you get the idea that greed, hatred, and delusion stop forever once you're enlightened. So you may have heard that coming from, someone who's teaching later Buddhism, but that is not how it was presented by the Buddha or in early Buddhism. So it's not a permanent state, which maybe sounds like bad news, but I think is actually good news, because if you think it's a permanent state and then you don't experience the permanent state, you think that you haven't gotten somewhere. There's somewhere to get that you haven't gotten. But this, I think, is actually true, that greed, hatred, and delusion don't stop permanently, but they stop all the time. So it's an ongoing process. And this is something you can actually experience. And now enlightenment isn't some magical thing that happened to someone somewhere, and maybe someone in the world right now has this and maybe not. It's something any of us can experience. So I think it's actually really good news. It's less magical, it's more real, it happens. And then we don't have to assume that we're never going to get there, because it would never happen that way. Unless you're dead, in which case, yeah, probably a bunch of other stuff happens. But anyway, we're not going there. Okay, shouldn't have gone there in the first place. So the original teachings of the Buddha are quite practical. It's about moments in life when we experience the peace of the dropping away of reactivity. We've all had these experiences, but we may not have paid them too much attention. I think this matters because the teachings of the Buddhism can be used to avoid the messiness of actual daily life and to imagine some abstract way of living, which I just think this happens, yoga too, instead of helping us to live more fully right now, which was the Buddha's intention, as far as I can tell. So remember that reactivity isn't wrong, and it doesn't have to be destroyed. We've evolved this way, and there are times when it can be helpful, right? Like if you get in some kind of emergency, you want to have that reactivity that makes us make this some split decision, or be able to run really fast, or be able to save somebody in some way. So this reactivity isn't wrong. It serves a purpose. We simply need to train ourselves not to identify with what's happening when we react. So the problem is, evolutionarily, right? We evolved to have this reactivity so that if they like to say, like the caveman philosopher, uh, there's some dinosaur coming up or whatever to come up and like munch him. And he's like, oh, look at this beautiful flower, and gets munched. Whereas, or he's like, what's the nature of reality, and gets munched. Whereas the caveman who actually survived saw the dinosaur or whatever and ran away. Right. So we've evolved from the sort of nervous caveman rather than the relaxed philosopher caveman. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that's the theory, and that makes some sense. So we've got this reactivity. It serves a purpose. It has served a purpose through history, but it's also the source of our suffering because we react all the time to things that aren't actual threats. Right? Like someone making an offhand comment or making some face, or, like a misunderstanding about something, or our food being wrong, or there's too long a line at the, like I'm coming from Vale to East Vale today, and I'm waiting and waiting because the pass is closed and you have to like show your permit, and the line, probably took 15 minutes. Like I didn't have anywhere to be. I mean, I wasn't that upset, but I was sort of like, gosh, what are we doing? And I'm thinking, I look back and I think, what better thing did I have to do than sit there and look at the gore? I don't know. Anyway, so we react more than we need to, and that's what causes the suffering. So sometimes that reactivity is going to help us, escape a natural disaster or something, or save someone in an emergency. But most of the time, we need to not identify with what's happening when we react, when it's a non-helpful kind of reaction. And over time, our practice is going to give us tools to develop the capacity to be able to just see what's going on instead of being lost in and carried away by the stories, memories, and plans that can so easily take us over. So what we're developing with mindfulness practice is this metacognition. It's sort of a wider overall knowing of what's happening that helps us to say, right now you are losing the plot, to yourself during a moment of act, like you're sort of losing it, but you sort of know you're losing it. And then that's not the same thing at all. Because the fact that you know you're losing it means you can relax and say, okay, this is happening, but get a grip. And in that moment, you're not caught because you're thinking about it and you're talking to yourself about it maybe, and it's a whole different thing. So that's the nirvana. What happens in mindfulness practice, sort of technically, is that we develop the part of the brain that knows things calmly. So this is the rational prefrontal cortex. And we literally grow gray matter there, and we grow neural connections there. And it's more complicated than that because there's the different parts of it. And every time I go to study it, it gets a little overwhelming. But there's like the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. Those are two of the ones that are super important. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. It's all the rational part of the brain. And the amygdala, which is the emotional fear center, kind of like reptilian brain in the back, older part of the brain, that shrinks with mindfulness practice. Yes, Annie?
I feel like I have a question, but you might say I'll answer it later. Let's say you're in your plot and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm in this plot. I need to, stop the story. And now I'm mindful. Take a deep breath, you relax, and it starts all over again. So then you're mindful of it, you calm down, and start all over again. Like,
yeah, it's not permanent.
Is there a point though? Let's say it goes on for an hour, and you're like, ah.
Yeah.
Is there a mantra or anything, or you just keep doing that because eventually it truly will go away?
Okay, so first of all, you have a mantra. So if you wanted to do that, that's already habitual for you. So you'd be welcome to do that. But what I actually recommend is, so you have the story in your mind. First of all, mindfulness practice has been shown in studies with fMRIs to, well, no, this one isn't an fMRI. This is more reporting. It reduces what's called stickiness, which is how long a negative emotional state lasts. So literally it won't last as long from doing this. And that's just from doing studies. Like maybe, I don't know if they hypothesized that or not, but that's what they found. So first of all, even if it keeps coming back and back and back through doing this practice, it will be, days, not months, or minutes, not hours, or whatever, applies for that. So that's one piece of good news. What I do personally, let's say that's happening, I try to label it and say, Anger or fear or judgment or blame or, whatever's going on. So I give it a name and that defuses it because it takes the activity, this is an fMRI proof, from your amygdala to your prefrontal cortex. Literally, by giving it a name, the naming rational part of your brain becomes the active part rather than the fear part. So already you're calmer. So give it a name. And, if you're trying to get rid of it, it's going to come back right away because that's fear, that's aversion. So that's what makes the suffering worse, the resistance. So instead, you want to give it permission to be there and say, oh, wow, blame again, huh? you know, have a little sense of humor, name it, and give it permission to be there. And that will make you relax and it'll make you clear. So now we're in parasympathetic nervous system, not sympathetic. So rest and digest, not fight or flight, and see what happens. And my guess is you don't need the mantra. But you could because you're already sort of conditioned to do that. So rather than having someone else do that, you've been doing that for years and years. So that's, your brain is sort of has the grooves of that. So that's not something I would do because I've never done that in that context. That's not totally true. I have in certain circumstances, ones that I was trained in for specific reasons. But yeah, but if you don't have an existing mantra practice, I wouldn't take one up for this because the mindfulness is designed for this directly. So, through practice, we change our brains and our nervous system to support the releasing of reactivity. So, this is the Buddha's teaching, and the practice that he taught is designed to make this easier. So, it gets easier and it gets habitual, which is great news. So, for myself, when I've seen, of the changes that I've seen over the years doing this practice with these circumstances, it's more like seeing through the reactive process is what's happened to me. So what I just described is more like practical, but over time you also generate wisdom about your own stuff. So for me, I might see anger arise and realize that for me, that's actually more of a protection mechanism against feeling hurt or feeling sad. So because I know that, because I've sort of examined my personal process over the years, I can be pissed off and blaming and I can sort of name it and relax a little bit. And then I know to look deeper. Oh, they said that and it hurt my feelings. And now I'm mad to cover, so I don't have to feel sad. Why don't I just feel the sadness? Usually for me, the sadness is momentary. So I didn't even have to, I just short circuit the anger because that was just a protection mechanism. The sadness, it was probably something quite minor. I feel it like Annie and I were talking about something else she felt. Was that Annie last week? Anyway, somebody had told me that, yeah, it was you about your mom, your dad. In any case, Annie was expressing that she felt something, it's like a big thing you might not normally want to feel, sadness, and that it just was a very natural process. And she came out the other side, quite beautifully. So often that something like anger is just hiding something like grief or fear or hurt, which is really, once you feel it, it's the whole thing passes and then you move on anyway. That's kind of a big other topic, but I wanted to mention that because that's what I actually do in myself now. And that takes some time to kind of look at the deeper layers of what you feel, which I highly recommend over time. So basically, now that I know that the blaming or anger is more of a protection mechanism for me, it doesn't have the same appeal it used to. Like, I know it's not real. I'm not saying I'm never angry like in a real way. I mean, I don't know that I am, but it's possible. But I know for me now, it's more about the love underneath that got cut off. And so that makes the anger kind of stupid and a waste of time when there's something real underneath that I could deal with instead. So the anger isn't quite as, it's just not fun anymore. Even though I was raised to do it, right? That's where I learned it. But I don't find it as effective as just knowing what's going on and then doing something else. So If we leave a reaction alone without buying into it, meaning without acting on it, like I'm angry, so I'm going to send you a nasty text message or call you or um, something like that. So that's without buying into it. It does what everything else does, which is it arises, it hangs around for some period of time, and then it ends and something else happens. And as we said, through mindfulness practice, the negative emotional states don't last as long. And that's just sort of statistically proven through people's experience. So the trick is to not blame ourselves, to not judge ourselves, to not feel guilty about it, for being human and having reactive responses to a stimulus in our environment, which we're, built to do. So it's not something wrong. We just need to open our heart and mind and let the reaction sort of follow its own course internally, and then act from a place of more space and calm. And let's say you're in the moment and you can't sort of take a walk first or wait to write your email back the next day. Then you do what you can to sort of calm down in the moment on the spot. Feel your feet, notice your breath, relax your hands, take a couple deep breaths, stuff like that. But ideally, take some time for yourself, and I think sometimes you just need to ask for it. Like, you know what? I'm feeling a little wound up right now. Can we talk about this tomorrow or in a couple hours? Like, I think most people would rather talk to you when you're calm and wait in most circumstances than do it now and then have to clean it up later. So asking for what we need, I think it's certainly worth trying if that feels appropriate to you in a circumstance. Chris taught me this actually, my boyfriend. Like, I used to just, write the answer to an email, right away. Like, I felt this pressure to respond right away. Like, somehow that's appropriate communication. And he's like, why don't you write that tomorrow? Okay, is that rude or something? So I've taken that on as a practice. It's amazing how different I feel the next day. Like, completely different when I'm not triggered. And then, then I don't have to have some whole mess of writing some sort of snide or snarky email. And then anyway, it's hilarious. I mean, it's that simple. And maybe people do expect an immediate response, but they'd rather have a good response, I think, a day later than one that's not so nice in the moment. So sometimes we become aware of a reaction in the middle of it happening. And this is an incredibly interesting stage. And I think this happens before, in my experience, for a while, it was more like finding out what was happening in the middle rather than just stopping it from happening. My reaction, my unconscious reaction. So we're becoming aware of our patterning when this happens. We're free to see what's going on. We learn about our conditioning. This will explain about what happens with other people too. But even in the middle of a strong emotion, you can cultivate this kind of awareness from having practiced every day or whenever you can practice, so that we're less entangled. And then, like, on the spot apologies seem to go a really long way. Like, I'm in the middle of some little tirade about my opinion about something, and I realize what I'm doing. And I just say, you know what? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to go there. People seem to take that even better than I would think. Like, that seems to fix things a lot better than I would think. So if you find yourself halfway down the path, just stop and apologize and see what happens. I think apologies go a really long way, especially in the moment. So when the reaction stops, whether it was worry or craving or anger, the Buddha's third teaching is to notice that it stopped. Pay attention to its absence. Notice that it isn't there. So this isn't what we normally do. We just normally move on to the next thing. Well, what's happening now? So this is pointing to something that I think most people don't do. It's like you get a cold or you get sick and you're like annoyed that you're sick. And then as soon as you're better, you're just doing something else. I mean, do you spend half a day saying, oh, it feels so good to feel well? I do that now because of this teaching. Like, appreciate feeling well, appreciate when an injury heals, like, enjoy it instead of just taking that for granted and moving on to the next thing. So that's what the Buddha's teaching about reactivity. Enjoy when it ends. Notice, sort of marinate there, immerse yourself in it, appreciate it. And that's going to help motivate us, obviously, to get there smoothly. My first teacher used to say, juxtapose this feeling with the feeling of worry or craving and anger that was there a moment before. So kind of in your mind, like, oh, this is how I felt half an hour ago. This is how I feel now. So this is the third teaching, to really become aware of this change when this goes away, and think about how you feel. And this is to really kind of hammer home, like, this is worth working on as well as enjoying. So most of us live with our minds jumping from piece of information to piece of information without ever really resting. And maybe that was true all along, but with technology, I think it's more true, at least in my life, than it used to be. So apparently we're addicted to our phones or whatever because we get a boost of dopamine every time new information comes in. Actual pleasure neurotransmitter just from like getting an email, checking the news, getting a text, whatever it is we do on our phones, online at the supermarket, and when we used to just stand there. So we're getting pleasure neurotransmitters every time this happens. So it feels good, but then our brain gets exhausted from burning all the dopamine and we totally space out because you only have so much dopamine to get through your day. And we kind of, I think, waste it on this addiction to the new information. So instead, this is teaching us to sort of enjoy some peace, to notice moments of peace and enjoy them. And that doesn't mean you can't check your phone, but like maybe take a moment first and enjoy what's going on. And you might even get stuck in that moment of peace and enjoy it a little longer. And this is bringing into our lives something that I think there used to be a lot more of, even in our lifetimes. I think for everyone here is old enough for that, to have that sense. But of course, historically, there was more and more sort of free nothing time that we just have less and less of. And there's plenty of good things about it. I'm not anti-technology, but for our nervous systems and for our enjoyment of life, I think it's helpful to start to reincorporate moments of peace, moments of calm, and to actually enjoy that and not need something exciting every moment to feel good, and then we burn out from it. And that's just the sort of neuroscience of it. So this freedom, this sort of calm peace, is the Buddha's description of nirvana. And this may not be the esoteric nirvana that you expected from the Buddha's first teaching after he was enlightened. I don't know what your thoughts are. Sorry about the little dog barking. But so here's my sort of textual support for the statement. The Buddha taught both that the Dharma is clearly visible and immediate. So clearly visible and immediate. That's the teachings. And he taught that nirvana is clearly visible and immediate. So if it's clearly visible and immediate, you don't have to be special to experience it. And it's not 1 in a million people who experience it. It's clearly visible and immediate. He explains to Sivaka, who's this wandering ascetic, Sivaka asks what this means, nirvana. He says, Sivaka asks the Buddha, when there's greed, hatred, and delusion in your mind, do you know it? Oh, no, sorry. So Sivaka asks what nirvana means. And the Buddha responds, this is his definition of nirvana. When there's greed, hatred, and delusion in your mind, do you know it? When there's no greed, hatred, or delusion in your mind, do you know that? In this way, the Dharma, meaning the teachings, is clearly visible. So that's literally how the Buddha describes nirvana. Knowing when there's greed, hatred, and delusion, and knowing when there isn't. So Sivaka isn't a Buddhist either. You don't have to, the Buddha wasn't saying you had to be special in any way to experience this. We've all had this experience. It happens in a moment. Long-term training makes it more frequent, easier to generate, and it probably lasts longer. The early teachings of the Buddha point us toward valuing peace, spaciousness, calm, and release. I think this is a great teaching for our time. We I already talked about this, but also my understanding, another little plug for taking time out from technology, is that without moments of peace and calm to allow the mind to kind of be at rest, we're not going to apparently process difficult emotional experience, because that could take some time, right? And I think this is part of why sometimes we let ourselves get super busy, is because we feel like maybe there's some lurking emotional experience, and maybe it's like, I'd rather deal with that tomorrow, so I'm just going to do this thing now. But it takes moments of calm, and I don't mean meditating. This could be going for a walk. This could be sitting and having a cup of tea and looking out the window. So this isn't necessarily formal. This isn't formal practice that I'm talking about now. Now I'm just talking about taking some time in your day to let your mind sort of do what it needs to do. So one thing that your mind needs to do is integrate emotional experiences that we've had. Now, maybe you train to be able to integrate them on the spot, which I think happens through practice, that more and more and more, you're able to simply feel everything in the moment. And then there's not a kind of buildup of past stuff. But until we train to do that, unless you were raised to do this well, which is totally possible, you don't have to be doing mindfulness or Buddhist practice to have that particular skill. Maybe your parents taught it to you. So for some people, this is going to be easier than for other people. But for most of us, I think we have this kind of a little bit of a backlog of things that need to process, and having quiet time allows the mind to do that. And it's not that you have to bring stuff up. Your mind, whatever, in a quiet moment, if your mind chooses to bring something up, that's perfect. And I haven't found for myself that I have to dredge my mind and try to remember. It'll come up again in the present moment, but we need to have a break for that to happen. The other thing that happens in a moment of peace is that we have creative ideas. Right. So just kind of going for a walk and not listening to a podcast, or again, sitting down and drinking a cup of tea and staring out the window, it might be the time that, or whatever it is you like to do, knitting or whatever, it might be the time that you, I don't know, come up with some fantastic idea about something you want to do. And it's harder to do that if you're always doing something else. So, but the Buddha wasn't just talking about downtime. He was talking about freedom. Release from our compulsive responses to challenging sense information, essentially. He was talking about freedom to not react in ways that escalate conflict or hurt feelings. The opportunity to communicate with each other in ways that are healing and connective. So we begin by noticing little things on the meditation cushion, like irritation about having an itch. We just want to give it permission to be there. Notice it, relax, stay clear. And this is training us to know anger, jealousy, fear. But we start with simple things like an itch. It's the same part of the brain. So we don't have to start with things that are harder. We can start with sort of boring moment to moment everyday stuff. And that's how this works. Or you notice some anxiety arises because your foot fell asleep. Don't try to force the anxiety to go away. Just see what your foot feels like in a relaxed and understanding way, or feel what the anxiety feels like in your mind and your body. Either way, we're training this calm knowing. And the itch and the foot falling asleep, they're not threatening. So it's nice to practice with things that don't feel threatening, so that we kind of build up our competence at this skill and grow the parts of the brain that we need. Then you might notice the ceasing of more powerful emotions. So on my third, I did these month-long meditation retreats every year for a long time. And on my third one, I'll just never forget this moment. I was super pissed off. There was a person in the retreat who was, I thought, being treated inappropriately by the instructor of the retreat. And there was this whole, there was a whole drama going on. And I was annoyed by it. I thought it was inappropriate. I thought this student was losing out on her retreat time. Anyway, I'm projecting all the stuff on the situation. We're all silent. No one's talking to each other. No one's making eye contact. I didn't know how she actually felt. And so I'm in walking meditation. This moment just sticks to my mind. I'm in walking meditation in this little hallway in this little house in Thailand. And all of a sudden, I just dropped it. I mean, I think for 2 or 3 days, I'd been obsessing about this. And it just dropped away. And I just felt so free and open and happy. And I probably started laughing out loud. I don't know. I was like, oh, that's it. I mean, I didn't force it to fall away. It fell away when it fell away. But I appreciated that moment. It was like, oh my God, what have I been doing to myself for days? It was none of my business. I mean, what was happening was consensual. It wasn't like something I needed to actually do anything about. It was none of my business. And anytime I get too caught up in someone else's business, that moment comes to me like, you could feel like this, or you could feel like that. And that's freedom. Not being, now it's different if it was something it would have been appropriate for me to be involved in. But in this case, it was none of my business. So, yeah, incredible freedom there, and to enjoy it and to actually feel it and remember it. And it's instructive to our minds going forward. So we can spend our lives kind of engrossed in other people's business or our own distorted thinking. We've all done it for some period of time. But that's the thing about reactivity. It tends to bias our thinking away from clarity and away from understanding. And the truth of why I was so upset about that particular situation is I had a previous involvement in that dynamic that I no longer had. But that's why, I was attached to someone else's business because it had previously been my business. And that distorted me from being clear. If I had not had that, I would have been more clear. I was completely distorted. But that's how reactivity is. It's biased, it's unclear, it's sees only one side of a situation, and it's not helpful. Narrow-minded. So if we want to be happy, we need to train ourselves to be able to disentangle from this reactivity so that we can make wise decisions in our speech and actions, so we can have an appropriate response to the stimuli in our world. And by the way, in that retreat, I'm really glad. I don't know if I would have said something. I certainly would have made a face at somebody. So how nice that we were, not speaking and not making eye contact. So nothing happened. And that's a nice thing that got a puppy coming in. Okay. So part of why I was able to see that release that I described so clearly is I was 2 weeks into meditating all day, right? So I was calm and I was very clear, and I'd had no stimulation for 2 weeks, no email, no books, no conversations, nothing, no music, nothing. So that really showed me the spaciousness, peace, and the absurdity of the previous couple of days. Everything's highlighted in that situation. So it helps to have some kind of daily practice. It doesn't have to be a month of silence, but even 10 minutes a day, maybe 20, I don't know what your day is like, to have some, relative stillness to do that practice. So I do recommend, if you are able to, in mindfulness practice, to do it first thing in the morning before you read the news and before you read your email and before you check your texts, if possible. And not everyone can. And some people prefer the evenings, lunch, afternoon. It doesn't have to be the morning. But for me, I started off sitting in the afternoon because I worked at home and I could finish at 4 and I'd sit then. But now I've really realized if I do it first thing, there's just less stuff. So it's a little clearer. It's okay to have stuff. It's just a little clearer when you have less. So a big misunderstanding about mindfulness and the teachings of the Buddha in general is that we should end up living somehow unattached to our surroundings in some kind of disconnected like bliss where everything's fine and I don't really care what's going on. And that's definitely a misunderstanding. Come on up, you guys. Beholding the ceasing puts us in a place of peace and clarity so we can act in the world in ways that promote happiness and harmony. So it's very much engaged in the world. And we're not trying to disengage from the world and not feel things. We have a meditation teacher training. I think that's where this came up this past weekend, and someone mentioned that she thought that people were going to feel less feelings if they did mindfulness practice. And it's actually the opposite. We're going to actually feel feelings instead of being afraid to feel them, and then move on to something else. But the idea is to not stop having feelings or it's to be able to stop avoiding actually feelings, which we all do to some degree, depending how we're conditioned and what's going on. So I think we have a responsibility to ourselves and those around us to right injustices and name what's true. But we won't be able to do this effectively if we're spinning out in our own neuroses all the time. So in order to be socially active in a way that's helpful, we need to cultivate spaciousness. We want to be able to see what's actually needed in a given situation, like the one I described in the retreat center. What was needed was nothing, right? None of my business. So you have to be calm to be able to see that kind of thing. Instead of acting in a way to just mollify our own discomfort, right? In that situation, I was uncomfortable and I just wanted to feel better about my own discomfort. So I was going to act. I mean, I don't know what I would have actually done, but some part of me would have wanted to act just so that I could feel better, but it wouldn't have made the situation better because I wasn't involved in the situation in reality. So we need to be able to listen to other people, which it's hard to do when we're reactive. And then we want to be able to act from a place of love toward what we truly value, instead of acting against what we hate in a state of anxiety. So just say that one more time. We want to be able to act from a place of love toward what we really value, instead of acting against what we hate in a state of anxiety. The outcome of our efforts will be directly affected by the mental state in which we think, speak, and act. So this is crucial to a meaningful and harmonious life. So I have a meditation for us. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts before we sit? Jennifer?
So my reactivity goes all over the spectrum from anxiety and stuff. And I've had some really great results working with the meditation from last time, which is feel the discomfort and be okay with it. Like it doesn't mean get rid of it, but so that's been really, really, I mean, transformative, unbelievable. There's one piece of reactivity that I have that I don't know how to deal with. And that is, you guys are all going to laugh at me, and it's totally okay, because I would laugh at myself if I heard this. I cry at everything. For instance, I was watching the Super Bowl and they were doing the national anthem and I'm weeping. The planes come over and I'm crying. Like, and it feels like I'm caught in a vortex, that I'm in a tidal wave that's about to crash. I'm being crushed by a boulder. Like, I cannot escape this reactivity. I want to run and hide. It's like it's the reaction and then the reaction of the reaction. And I'm aware of that, but the anger, the anxiety, that I can deal with. This, it just seems so much bigger to me.
So I don't think, and I'm guessing, right? I'm not there. So you need to look for yourself. But what I'm hearing is you're having heart-opening moments of being touched. So that itself isn't reactivity. That's nice.
Oh,
The
Or-
reactivity is the fear of it.
Right.
So, because and I'll tell you, and you and I were raised in the same part of the country. I never used to do that. And I've become through meditation, I cry at anything now. It's so weird. I get touched, I tear up at like, I don't know, the most random things. But I think that's healthy for me because I don't cry enough.
Yeah.
So my guess is let it happen, enjoy the heart opening moment and see how it goes. Report back next week if you want to. But yeah, the reactivity would be the not welcoming that situation that actually might be quite beautiful. And I think could be
Thank you. That is really helpful.
oh good.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Great. All right. So let's do a little meditation practice together. Sitting in some way that's comfortable for you. Probably closing your eyes, although it's fine to sit with eyes open if that's better for you. So let's drop your mind into your body by cultivating a relaxed knowing of how your body feels right now. You can do an organized scan of the body if you like, feet up or head down. I tend to more do a kind of what they call popcorn exploration of the body, just sort of looking around wherever seems interesting. So there's no right or wrong way to know the body. Sometimes it's nice to just feel the entire body at once, the kind of field of sensations. I like doing that too. Locating yourself in your body in a relaxed way. We'll allow the breath to settle into a natural rhythm. It can help to relax the belly to allow this to happen. Sometimes when we look at the breath, we start controlling it and it's just sort of automatic in some of us. So if that happens, no problem, just sort of disengage a little bit in the control mechanism and do your best to allow the breath to settle on its own, but know that that's not weird. And now I'd like you to turn your attention to your overall mood or mental state. Without judging what you see when you look, know how your mind feels in a spacious way. So this is reflexive awareness, knowing of our own knowing. Very interesting that we have this ability. Very helpful. And look to see, are you tired or alert? Remember, non-judgmental, just answering what you feel without, wanting it to be one way or the other. Calm knowing, relaxed knowing. Are you calm or agitated? Is your mind fuzzy or does it feel clear and crisp? Are you interested or are you bored? Are you patient or impatient? See if you can engage in a simple knowing of your mood. Meet it with a presence. Really there for it in a calm, relaxed, embodied way. And now being aware of this overall state, how does it affect you? How is it affecting you right now? How does it affect what you experience right now? How does it affect how you relate to what you're experiencing right now? And what I mean by that is, how are you influenced by the mental state that you're in, by the mood that you're in? This is a fairly high level inquiry. This is interesting stuff. How is the way your mind feels right now affecting how you are? And now I'm going to give you a little something to try to do. It's okay if this doesn't work for you. It works for some people. Don't worry if this isn't your way of thinking, but see for a moment if you can shift your identity from identifying with your mood or attitude, kind of being it, into being the awareness that knows and recognizes the state you're in. And then if that worked for you, again, it's okay if it didn't. Practice, if you can, shifting back and forth a few times between being the attitude, believing it, letting it influence you, and then stepping out of the attitude and simply knowing it, being the awareness that knows it. Back and forth between being in the attitude, believing the attitude, and then simply knowing that the attitude is there in a relaxed and open way. If you're able to do that, notice how different it feels to be the attitude compared to stepping back and being the knowing of the attitude. Now, for a little bit, I'd like you to practice being the knowing of your experience. So, what I don't want you to do is kind of disconnect like an indifferent witness. That's a misunderstanding of the teachings. Instead, just play around with this, be gentle and caring, and fully know your experience in an intimate way, but from the point of view of a calm, emotionally balanced, clear observing. So be the clear, relaxed knowing that's involved, meaning there, right there with it, but not caught up in. And what we're looking to do is to discover the sort of calm center that's in the midst of the ups and downs of our experience. Okay, and then one more little exercise we're going to do. I'm going to give you a question. I'd like you to just drop this question into your mind. It's not to be answered. It's designed to generate an experience. So don't worry about like a conceptual answer. But I'd like you to ask yourself the question, what is here if nothing needs fixing? Again, what is here if nothing needs fixing? So that was not a beginning meditation. So it's okay if that was like a little weird. I just thought it would be fun to just go deep there and sort of introduce what might be to you like a totally different way of looking at your mind. So don't worry if that seemed weird. It could be even something you come back to later. But any questions, thoughts, comments about any of that, which was also a lot in a short amount of time?
I loved it, Karen. I thought it was fantastic. I'm actually going to send you an email about maybe just a quick little blurb, something that happened after our session last week, all about reactivity. And it was just so poignant that it happened at exactly the time that you had just said it, like hours before. So
Wow,
thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that and for the email
You're
in
welcome.
advance.
I'll be on video next time, I
Oh,
promise.
cool. For a second, I wasn't sure who was talking. Like no one's lips are moving.
I guess I have a question, and maybe this fits in more with the Eightfold Path, but through my practice, consistently, through the practice of acceptance and the practice of seeing how unproductive, dangerous anger is, have learned not to get angry under kind of the quick capture of don't go there. And so I wonder where in your teaching of this Buddhist practice or basics of Buddhist, which are quite different, but enjoyable for me to be listening to. Where does acceptance and where does the ability to really change who we are and how we see the world so that anger is no longer an emotion? Because I agree with you, it's taught. So a question.
Yeah, so acceptance, I think, is a big part of the technique of mindfulness. And you could call acceptance another term for embracing all of life. So maybe the first teaching. So I have like a radical acceptance course on my website, and I used to think of this as sort of an add-on thing. And then at some point, I don't know, a couple years after teaching it, I was like, wait, this is a mindfulness class. Because really that's what mindfulness is. I mean, accepting something, being with it as it is, not pushing it away, not trying to change it. Yeah. And then in terms of anger not arising anymore, I mean, that's awesome. But in the teachings of the Buddha, they say that Mara, so Mara is like kind of the devil, but Mara is supposed to really represent the Buddha's greed, hatred, and delusion. And Mara keeps coming back. So Mara visits him even like, I think on his deathbed. But the Buddha's like, hey, Mara, what's going on? So the Buddha's not perturbed by greed, hatred, and delusion, but they don't say, I mean, it's a metaphor, but they don't say the Buddha didn't have it. They say the Buddha wasn't bothered by it. So that's great if it doesn't arise. I do think as you change your habits, yeah, what arises is going to be different. And I'm angry a lot less than I used to be, like a lot less. And when it happens, sometimes I'm even amused by it. But I don't want anyone to have the idea that you're not doing it right if they keep happening, because the classic teaching is that it keeps happening. But yeah, I mean, do expect it to come less often and maybe not much at all.
Well, and maybe it's there, but you recognize it and are able to not accept it, to shift, to come back to acceptance, and no, I'm not angry. So.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
No,
and
thank
it's
you.
nice to have the perspective of someone who's been practicing longer, right? To have a sense of where it's going. So thank you. Yeah, Jennifer.
Can you help me understand the question, find yourself in your body? Or
Yeah, I thought that I hadn't given. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, I'm trying to get to all this stuff, and we've ended up with, I think I wrote too much material. So we've had 10-minute meditations, and I was expecting like to do 20-minute meditations. So, and I didn't want to give anything up today that I had written for the longer. So basically, it's like, so it's not actually true that you live in your head or in your brain. Your awareness is everywhere equally, but we have this idea that we live in our head. Most people, if you ask sort of where their mind is, they'll point to their head. In Asia, apparently they point to their heart, which is interesting. But awareness isn't located, and that's a whole other topic, and there's whole traditions built around that, and it's actually one of my favorite things. But it can help us to sort of imagine the mind, if you imagine it in your head, but even if not, kind of dropping down into your body. And you do that by feeling sensations in the body. That's the technique. But it describes something, it's more targeted to a kind of misunderstanding of how we perceive ourselves. But it's actually a really helpful thing to do kind of all the time, is to know that your body's there and feel it a little bit. It's very grounding. And it tells you if your breathing's, if you're holding tension, if your posture isn't right, if, anything else you might want to know, but it's just very grounding in the present moment. So it's a good habit to get into, sort of classic yoga, Buddhist thing to do, but super practical actually. So play with it. That's your homework, Jennifer, for this week on top of everything else, everyone's homework. I've had teachers tell me that you should have 60 to 75% of your attention in your body all the time. I don't know, but what about 20? What about 25? 30? I don't know. Pick your own number. 5. I don't care what what number you want, but try it this week as part of your homework and just see if that feels good. I think it feels good. And it helps with all of this identifying reactivity and stuff like that. And, if you start feeling some reactivity arise and you relax your body, it makes a huge difference. So it's also another way of kind of heading off full-blown reactions. Sometimes, maybe not. Good question. I thought of it as I said that. I was like, oh, this is we could do 5 minutes on that. And I gave myself 10 minutes. So yeah. Great.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Great. Kelly.
What was in the meditation? What was the last thing you said? The last was not a riddle. I don't want to call it a riddle.
So I said to ask yourself the question, what's here if nothing needs fixing?
Okay.
And it doesn't work for everybody, but for some people that induces a peaceful, calm state of mind. For a lot of people.
Okay. Like space.
Space,
in
yeah.
your mind.
Yeah, it's sort of a modern interpretation of a Dzogchen teaching. That's from Locke Kelly, if anyone's interested in that. I don't find his book particularly readable. So, and really that one line, there's a couple other lines he has, like out of the whole book, I pulled like 2 lines and I always just
Okay.
use that one. But it's interesting how even in someone who hasn't practiced, that might just induce a state of stillness. He calls his work Shift into Freedom, and he talks about just how you can just do it in a moment. So I just wanted to throw that in there in case that worked for you. I like to teach from like all different angles. So hopefully one of them works for you.
Great.
And they don't all have to. But I think it's fun because we all work differently. We're wired differently. Some instructions make sense to us, some don't. It's okay. That's normal. So that's why that was in there. And hopefully you liked it. And if you didn't like it,
did.
no worries. Sometimes it makes people think and then it doesn't really work. That's why I don't think he gives all that explanation.
Mhm.
But yeah. I was wondering if anyone would notice that that's kind of weird. But I love it.
So there wasn't a real answer to it. Like I kept flip-flopping, and I definitely, now that you said, I was like thinking, I was like, oh, there isn't anything here. That's so peaceful. And then also I was like, well, shouldn't I have something to fix? Isn't that why I've been reincarnated as Annie Gooch? Because I have something to fix. And what am I supposed to be fixing? And
Yeah.
of course, anyway, it's like,
So the question
so clearly
is,
not working for me.
if there's nothing to fix, I'm not saying there's nothing to fix, but if you ever want to try this, Annie, if there's nothing to fix, just postulate that for a moment, then what's here? It's saying what else is here? What else is here other than the fixing? It's not saying the fixing, isn't a real thing or isn't interesting, but what else is here? And what else is here is your calm, spacious awareness. So it's a way to tap into calm, spacious awareness. And it's momentary. It doesn't last all that long. You might be able to keep that going depending how much you practice for 5 minutes or something. It's not something you're going to do for an hour. It's more of it's a way that someone may not have had that experience of like, whoa, spacious peace. That could be someone's first experience of that. I don't know. But yeah, the downside is Annie's experience with like that just starts you down a whole line of train of thought, and that was unnecessary, but I'm glad we talked about it. Okay, Susan?
Yeah,
Did you have something or did you just get unmuted?
I got unmuted because I
Okay.
was thinking when we asked what is here, I thought everything and beauty
Totally.
and love if we're lucky enough. So yeah, that's why I unmuted myself.
Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what's there. And love and beauty, these are other descriptions of awareness, kind of classically. So we all have it. It's there. It's just we can be so caught up in what we need to fix that we miss it. But it's our nature. It's there for everyone. But it's, being able to tap into it is a skill that we can train in.
Was my computer making funny noises again?
Yeah, I just wasn't sure what was happening. And because it's a black
What?
square, it just never, yeah. All right, I'm going to mute you, Susan. I'm going to read you I'm going to try to end with 2 quotes every time. Your first one is a poem. So this is called Peace is This Moment Without Judgment by Dorothy Hunt. Do you think peace requires an end to war? Or tigers eating only vegetables? Does peace require an absence from your boss, your spouse, yourself? Do you think peace will come some other place than here? Some other time than now? In some other heart than yours? Peace is this moment without judgment. That is all. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Peace is this moment without thinking that it should be some other way, that you should feel some other thing, that your life should unfold according to your plans. Peace is this moment without judgment. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. And then I have a story for you, short story. Jack Cornfield tells this story. He and some other students were walking with his teacher, Ajahn Chah, through the forest in Thailand. And Ajahn Chah pointed to a large boulder. And he asked the students, "Is that boulder heavy?" And of course they said, "Yes." He said, "Not if you don't pick it up." Thank you so much. I'll see you in a couple days. Have a good night. Bye.